whispers, anger, and goodbye, inside the stormy night of Park Bo-gum and Kim So-hyun. What really happened when the smiles faded and the whispers turned sharp? Why did she walk away into the darkness, leaving everyone stunned? Tonight, Red Carpet Revealed takes you beyond the headlines to uncover the truth. Let's find out, right now, what really happened that night when two of Korea's brightest stars, Park Bo-gum and Kim So-hyun, exchanged whispers, then heated words, and finally, silence? It was supposed to be a celebration, a glittering evening filled with laughter and applause. But somewhere between the smiles and the flashbulbs, something cracked. The world saw her walk away into the dark, leaving behind a room stunned into silence. Tonight, Red Carpet Revealed takes you behind the velvet curtain, into the whispers, the fury, and the quiet heartbreak of that unforgettable night. The ballroom at the Grand Seoul Hotel was a masterpiece of light and sound. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead as guests in tailored suits and silk gowns clinked glasses and posed for photographs. Waiters glided silently between tables carrying trays of champagne and canapes. At the center of it all stood Park Bo-gum, ever the picture of calm, his black tuxedo flawless, his polite smile unwavering. Kim So-hyun arrived not long after, her silver gown catching the light with every step. She smiled too, but those who watched closely might have noticed how her eyes darted quickly around the room, as if searching for something. Or someone. At first, nothing seemed amiss. They exchanged a few words, enough to satisfy the photographers clamoring for a shot of the two stars together. They even shared a laugh, though to some, it sounded a little too sharp, a little too rehearsed. Then came the whispers. It started at their table, a word here, a glance there, but soon spread through the entire room like an electric current. One waiter overheard her say, "Not here," her voice low but laced with tension. He claimed she clenched her napkin so tightly it tore in two. As the evening wore on, the air around them thickened. Park Bo-gum was seen leaning toward her, speaking quietly, his expression serious. She sat rigid, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth. A stylist at a nearby table said, "It felt like we were watching a storm gather, you could almost hear the thunder rumbling beneath their words." At one point, she rose abruptly and disappeared into the corridor. When she returned, her cheeks were flushed, eyes glistening as though she had been crying. He stood when she approached, but she waved him off, sinking back into her chair with a brittle smile that fooled no one. The moment everyone remembers came toward the end of the night. A toast was being made, glasses raised high, when Kim So-hyun whispered something to Park Bo-gum that made him freeze. His jaw tightened. Then he stood so quickly his chair toppled backward. The music faltered, conversations died mid-sentence. All eyes turned to them as he hissed something in return, his hand gripping the back of his chair so hard his knuckles turned white. "You don't mean that," she said. Voice louder now, sharp enough to cut through the hush. He said nothing more, just stared at her, his chest rising and falling, before she stood as well and walked away, her gown swishing behind her like a silver wave. They disappeared into the hallway, leaving behind a room full of stunned silence and awkward glances. People whispered, some pulled out their phones, but no one dared to follow. What happened next, outside the safety of the ballroom, is where the story truly begins. Those who peeked through the heavy velvet curtains say they saw them standing in the marble-floored lobby, facing each other, the tension between them almost visible. At first, their words were low and fast, possible to catch. But as the minutes ticked by, their voices rose. "Now," she demanded, her hands clenched at her sides. "You should have said something before." He ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head. "You don't understand," he shot back. "It's not that simple." A few more words, muffled, and then silence. She turned, one hand covering her mouth as though to stifle a sob, and walked toward the grand doors. He reached out then, almost catching her sleeve, but stopped short. She didn't look back. The doors closed behind her with a soft, final thud. And yet, he didn't move. He stood there in the lobby long after she left, shoulders hunched, staring at the empty doorway. Hotel staff avoided his gaze as they passed, sensing something private, something raw, that should not be witnessed. One guest said, he looked lost, like the whole world had just walked out the door. The hours that followed, fragments of their argument began to leak, A driver claimed he saw her outside the hotel, pacing under the awning as the rain started to fall, mascara streaking her cheeks. A fan waiting for an autograph said she watched Park Bo-gum emerge later, his hair damp, his bow tie loosened, his eyes red. Spoke to anyone as they left the building separately, swallowed up by the Seoul night. Online, the speculation began immediately. Hashtags like #Bo-gum So Hyun Fight and #Stormy Night started trending within minutes of the first fan posts. Forums lit up with theories: a lover's quarrel? A professional dispute? A personal betrayal? One fan posted a blurry photo of them in the lobby, captioned simply, "This wasn't just an argument." The next morning, their agencies released identical statements calling the incident a personal matter and asked the public to respect their privacy. But the choice of words only fanned the flames. Why not deny it outright? Why not explain? The lack of clarity left a vacuum that fans and reporters rushed to fill. One stylist claimed she heard snippets earlier in the evening suggesting weeks of tension leading up to that night. "They've been avoiding each other at rehearsals," she said. But nobody thought it would come to this. Another insider insisted the two had been unusually close for months, sharing the rides to set, spending long hours talking in quiet corners, only to suddenly grow distant. "It was like watching a slow-motion car crash," he said. "We all saw it coming but couldn't stop it." And those who tried to defend them admitted the scene was hard to watch. One guest described the look on Kim So-hyun's face as she left the room. She looked like someone who had finally said everything she'd been holding in, and regretted every word. Another remembered the way Park Bo-gum stood there afterward, like he'd been punched in the gut. In the hours that followed, more stories trickled in. Someone claimed to have seen her later that night sitting alone in a cafe near the hotel, still in her gown, staring out the window with a cup of tea growing cold in front of her. Someone else swore they spotted him by the Han River, leaning on the railing, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, watching the water. What really happened that night remains unclear. But those who were there agree on one thing: it wasn't just an argument. It was something deeper, something years in the making, out under the weight of too many unsaid words. And in the end, as she walked away into the night, it left everyone watching with the uneasy feeling that they had just witnessed the quiet breaking of two hearts. As the lights faded and the ballroom doors finally closed, what lingered was not just the echo of raised voices or the hush that fell over the room, but a deep, inexplicable ache, the kind only two people who once meant everything to each other can inflict. The storm that began with whispers and ended in silence left more questions than answers. And perhaps that is why it has haunted everyone who witnessed it ever since. Park Bo-gum stood alone long after Kim So-hyun had vanished into the rain. Those who caught a final glimpse of him that night swear they saw something shift in his expression, not anger anymore. Quiet devastation, as though every word he hadn't said had crystallized into regret. He finally left the lobby only when the staff began to clear the last of the champagne glasses and sweep the marble floor, his footsteps heavy, shoulders slumped. For her part, Kim So-hyun disappeared into the city, swallowed by the dark streets and glittering lights, her silver gown clinging to her like a second skin in the drizzle. A fan later posted that she'd seen her sitting alone in a taxi, staring out the window with an unreadable expression, not tears anymore, just emptiness. That was the last anyone saw of her that night. The days that followed brought no clarity. Both stars resumed their public lives with professional poise, smiling faintly for cameras, answering questions in practiced tones. But those who looked closely could see it, the way her eyes darted away when his name came up, the way his smile faltered when someone mentioned hers. Behind their carefully constructed facades, the storm still raged. And yet, perhaps this is exactly what makes their story so captivating. It is not simply the sight of two beloved stars cracking under pressure that has captured the imagination of fans. It is the humanity in their unraveling. They tried, and failed, to keep it private, way they broke, and didn't bother pretending it didn't hurt. That night showed the world something raw and unpolished, a glimpse of two people who could not hide what they felt, even when it cost them everything. In the end, no one truly knows what words were exchanged beneath the chandeliers or what was left unsaid in the rain. All we have are fragments: the toppled chair, the torn napkin, the glistening pavement, the quiet goodbye. We know is that something significant ended that night, or perhaps, something even more significant began. As sometimes storms don't destroy, they reveal. And as long as there are whispers and questions in the memory of her walking away while he stood rooted in place, this story will live on, not just as gossip, but as a poignant reminder of how even stars can stumble when love and pride